I now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to congratulate you at the outset upon your presidency over the proceedings of the Security Council during this month, November. I hope that this august council will be able to benefit from the wisdom of the Chinese during your presidency. Mr. President, I should like to begin with providing information to raise awareness among members of the Security Council. A terrorist, a Syrian terrorist, is called Jihad Diab. Jihad Diab is known as Abu al-Diab. This terrorist in 2000 traveled to Afghanistan to combat alongside al-Qaeda. In 2001, the Pakistani security forces arrested this individual with other international terrorists. The Pakistani security forces handed them over to U.S. intelligence forces who transferred them to Guantanamo prison. During the 2000 terrorist crisis that has been plaguing my country, it turned out that the American security forces released a large number of Guantanamo prisoners. These prisoners miraculously were able to leave Guantanamo and travel to my country. And they secured visas, they received passports, money. There were significant efforts undertaken to help them. They received a lot of money. And these individuals were able to travel dozens of kilometers, and nobody halted them. From Guantanamo, they were able to reach Syria unimpeded. Many of these individuals included this terrorist, Jihad Diab. So this terrorist, Jihad Diab, is currently residing in Turkey. He is visiting his mother who is sick in one of the hospitals in Turkey, and he's able to freely move between Syria and Turkey to fight alongside Al-Nusra Front, a terrorist entity which has been inscribed on your list. So this is the first part of the news I'm sharing with you today. The second part delves into the details, and I trust that it will be of interest to you. The American government has reached an agreement with the Uruguayan government. This was in 2014. With Uruguay. Pursuant to this agreement, a large number of terrorists from Guantanamo prison were transferred to Uruguay for so-called humanitarian reasons. They include 3 Syrians, 1 Palestinian, and 1 Tunisian. And this includes Jihad Diab. So this way we can trace what Jihad Diab has done to move and transfer himself from Guantanamo to Syria. And for humanitarian reasons, he was transited through Uruguay. The United States has stated that they reached an agreement with the government of Uruguay, pursuant to which the government of Uruguay has committed to keeping this terrorist on their soil. However, this terrorist was able to leave Uruguay and to reach Syria. This terrorist is currently residing in Turkey. He is recruiting terrorists and is sending them to Syria, either to Idlib or other areas of Syria. And we have informed the 1988 and the Committee 1253 about this information, and we expect that these various committees will deliver on a meaningful response, this time to inscribe the name of this terrorist on the sanctions list. Of course, if there are parties who genuinely wish to tackle terrorism as a heinous scourge that has been plaguing my country, I will tell you something else. In 2018, we informed this information was provided in S 2014/195. So this is another Syrian terrorist named Raysam al-Hassab. Raysam al-Hassab transferred chemical material from Turkey to Hayat al-Ahrar al-Sham, which is located in Idlib, and this is practically the al-Nusra front. The Turkish authorities, on 31 May 2018, they released this terrorist after having arrested him in flagrant delicto in possession of chemical material on Turkish soil. He was released to be able to play his terrorist role in Syria. This terrorist, Haysam al-Qassab, asked of Turkish providers, the provider is called Khaled Osman Nalika. This is a provider who leads the Zurwe company for imports and exports in Turkey, which is working in Bulhaljili in Turkey. And we can even describe the color of the facade of this document and the number of this building. So Haysam al-Qassam requested from this Turkish provider, requested material, including white phosphorus, red phosphorus, potassium, fluorol, methanol, and resveratrol. He stated that he needed these materials to take white smoke out of those areas, and to say that it is the Syrian, to state then erroneously misleading that the Syrian authorities were responsible for this. So the aim was to use those materials as chemical weapons. So that is for the information to be provided to you about the terrorism that my country has been suffering, terrorism supported by well-known states. Sir, day after day, the practices of some Western countries in this council have demonstrated that they have become accustomed to and now enjoy exploiting the principles of international law and the provisions of the United Nations Charter, as well as the rules governing the proceedings of the United Nations. These countries have manipulated United Nations platforms for the advancement of their political agendas to interfere in the affairs of other countries. The aim of this is to cover up for the crimes that they themselves perpetrated against the Syrian people, and to also to cover up for the crimes perpetrated by armed terrorist groups for whom they have provided myriad forms of support over the course of the past 7 years, including by facilitating acquisition by these terrorist groups, their acquisition of chemical toxic materials that they then used against the Syrian army and against Syrian civilians. Day after day, light is shed on unprecedented atrocities perpetrated against the Syrian people due to the heinous policies carried out, the rogue policies of some of those countries. The most recent example is the discovery of mass graves in Raqqa. This occurred several days ago. And this is a consequence of coalition, the so-called coalition, international coalition's airstrikes. The tragic discovery of these mass graves in Raqqa has more than 4,000 bodies there. More than 4,000 bodies. Most are women, mostly women, children, and the elderly. And this after having rid themselves of only 2% of those. We eliminated only 2% of them, and we discovered 4,000 bodies in mass graves. This is a tragic discovery, and it corroborates the veracity of the information we provided repeatedly with respect to the brutalities of those crimes perpetrated by the coalition, which has completely destroyed the Syrian city of al-Raqqa after having transferred Daesh terrorists to the governorate of Deir ez-Zor, and this to ensure that Syrian government cannot control the shared borders with Iraq, and this for them to be able to deliver on their plans to undermine the sovereignty and unity of the Syrian Arab Republic in conjunction with the militias under their wing. My country has once again called upon the Security Council to deliver on its responsibility to safeguard international peace and security and to act immediately to put an end to the crimes perpetrated by the international coalition against the Syrian people, to prevent recurrence of these crimes, and to hold the perpetrators of those crimes against my people accountable. We would call upon the Security Council to conduct an international investigation into these crimes and these massacres which we revealed in the city of al-Raqqa. We would call upon the Council once again to put an end to the illicit, aggressive, illegal presence of American forces and other foreign forces on Syrian soil. Mr. President, I first would like to tell those who have a short memory that the commitment of Syria to eradication of WMDs does not date back to 2013 alone. 2013 was the year we joined the Chemical Weapons Convention. Quite to the contrary, our commitment to eradicate weapons of mass destruction is a long-standing commitment. I would like to recall for all that my country in late 2003 presented on 27 December 2003 to be exact, when we were a member of the Security Council. At that point, we submitted an initiative to make the Middle East an area free of all kinds of weapons of mass destruction. Nonetheless, at the time, the United States delegation threatened to exercise its right to a veto if we put this proposal to the vote at the Security Council. So our commitment is long-standing, dating back to 2003. In this regard, we reiterate our call for member states to endeavor to make the Middle East a WMD-free zone. We call upon you to urge Israel to join the Non-Proliferation Treaty as a non-nuclear state and to submit all of its nuclear-related activities and facilities to the monitoring and oversight of the IAEA. My country has honored its commitments pursuant to joining the Chemical Weapons Convention, and we honored our commitments under Resolution 2118 of the Security Council dating 2013. Syria has always endeavored to cooperate in a positive, transparent, and flexible way to uphold our commitments at a time when we are faced with tremendous challenges, difficult security conditions, complicated, provocative circumstances spawning from the hostile conduct of some regional and international stakeholders. The Syrian government has achieved taken an unprecedented step in history by eliminating in record time our chemical weapons program irreversibly and on a United States vessel. And yet, alas, instead of commending what was done by the Syrian government, we would observe that those countries who have taken a liking to manipulating international law, those who engage in misleading the international community, we see that they're calling for meetings, for shows within the Security Council on an almost day-to-day basis with the sole aim of advancing vain, provocative, unfounded allegations against the Syrian government. I would reiterate for those countries once again that there is an elephant in the room, as the English expression goes, an elephant in the room. That is that those countries who called for today's meeting are the same countries that facilitated acquisition by terrorist groups of toxic and chemical material. The elephant, ladies and gentlemen, is that these armed terrorist groups are those who used such material against Syria. The elephant, ladies and gentlemen, is the statements of senior officials in those cities and countries with those statements we've all heard today, statements that the only way to address this issue is to save those terrorists is through the use of chemical weapons. So there are countries in this hall who want to see chemical weapons used, those who are prompting terrorist groups to use these weapons, to once again have these shows, convene these meetings, and to unfoundedly accuse the Syrian government and to say that the Syrian government used those heinous weapons. And I would take this opportunity to note that these heinous weapons are European weapons and American weapons, weapons in Vietnam and European weapons in the hands of France and Germany, as was mentioned by my colleague, the representative of France, who mentioned the war early on. So the use of chemical weapons indeed is Western use of chemical weapons. One day, I visited Hanoi on a Vietnamese aircraft. I traveled to Saigon and Hanoi. I saw from the window of my airplane, I saw giant gaps in the ground, giant gulfs in the ground, craters in the ground. And these are craters, I was told, where American chemical weapons were dropped and the cities were burned. Thousands upon thousands of craters, thousands of kilometers between Saigon and Hanoi. I repeat, thousands of kilometers, thousands of craters. The elephant in the room, ladies and gentlemen, is that these statements are a direct incitement for armed terrorist groups, for them to use toxic chemical weapons against civilians in Idlib, and for them to fabricate evidence and to seek false witnesses, to manipulate the crime scene. And these countries, with their media and political acumen, they stand ready to accuse the Syrian government of intervening to save terrorist groups. And this is exactly what was the case in Khan al-Assal, Khan Sheikhoun, and this happened in other areas as well. Ladies and gentlemen, the elephant is the staged episodes conducted by the White Helmets that are the British indirect branch of the al-Nusra Front, vis-a-vis the presumed use of toxic chemical weapons in a number of Syrian areas. The elephant, ladies and gentlemen, is that the fact-finding mission continuously violated its mandate. It failed to uphold professional standards. It adopted a selective approach in its investigations. It has not been transparent, not upheld the chain of command. That, Madam Nakamitsu, is the truth. The elephant is the use by the International Coalition of White Phosphorus, a prohibited chemical agent under international law. This was repeated use against Syrians in Syria. The elephant is that these countries are turning a blind eye to more than 160 letters delivered by my government to the Secretary General and to the Security Council for Committee 1540 and for the Committee on the Counterterrorism Committee concerning the possession and use by armed terrorist groups of chemical and toxic material. The elephant, ladies and gentlemen, is that the Security Council has not taken any measure to address those countries sponsoring and financing those armed terrorist groups. These countries that have facilitated possession of toxic and chemical weapons for those groups. In our most recent letter, we informed you about a tremendous explosion on Thursday, 18 October 2018, in a part of a factory with a large amount of fertilizer, explosive material, and liquid chlorine barrels, a factory in the possession of armed terrorist groups in Idlib, specifically in the city of Termanin, which is 15 kilometers from the Turkish border. This factory is supervised by foreign experts, Turkey, from the United Kingdom, and the explosion cost the lives of 9 of the so-called experts and 2 of the so-called White Helmets. We would remind you that some al-Nusra agents in the past transferred deliveries from the factory in conjunction with White Helmets to an unknown destination. Mr. President, turning to resolution of the so-called outstanding issues having to do with the first declaration of Syria, my country is of the view that tremendous efforts and tremendous time was spent on certain aspects of the declaration which continues to be addressed as outstanding issues, and yet they were amply studied and addressed. My country believes that it is important to reconsider the composition of the Declaration Assessment Team. It is important to introduce changes to the team, to incorporate into the team scientific and technical expertise rather than intelligence information. It is important to stop to close a blind eye to the interpretations of Syrian experts and adhering to a one-sided approach. The nature of the Declaration Assessment Team work has changed. It had been an assistance team, and it now has become an investigation team. And this is something which runs counter to the provisions of the Convention. As a result, all of the issues that were discussed remain pending, and yet there is no justification. Even though Syria has collaborated with the Declaration Assessment Team in general, Syria has presented all information at its disposal and responded effectively and promptly to the questions and requests for clarification that were submitted to it. To conclude, Mr. President, my country's government, before this Council and before the Executive Council of the OPCW, repeatedly confirmed that we condemn any and all use of chemical weapons, regardless of the types of WMDs, given that this constitutes a crime against humanity, and this is immoral and cannot be justified in any way, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the whereabouts, regardless of the cause. Here we reiterate that the Syrian army has never used chemical weapons. We no longer possess those weapons. We destroyed our stockpile years ago. We would recall that the Syrian chemical stockpile was completely destroyed on board an American vessel, MV Cabre, in the Mediterranean. Madam Sigrid Kaag attested to this in the report she submitted in June 2014 to this Council. So this case was closed 4 years ago, but there are some who do not wish this to be the case. They wish to continue to accuse the Syrian government each month through these meetings, through these shows. They want a great deal of money, a great deal of resources to be expended here and at The Hague at a time, yet this case is closed, that there's no substance to this, essentially. Ladies and gentlemen, the Syrian government confirms that we shall continue to uphold all the commitments we undertook when we joined the Chemical Weapons Convention, and our commitments in our struggle against terrorism, a struggle that will not stop regardless of any political bribery, regardless of the heinous exploitation of the blood of innocents in Syria. Thank you, sir.
I thank the representative.